Welcome to Aspects of D&D, and I'm going to talk today about what game do the rules of Dungeons and Dragons create by looking at some character sheets. I think it's obvious that the rules of a game determine the kind of game it is. I don't mean they determine everything about the experience of a game, but let's say in sport, in association football, in soccer, outfield players aren't allowed to handle the ball when it's in play. The goalkeeper can only handle the ball when it's in the defensive area. In rugby, on the other hand, rugby football, you can handle the ball all the time pretty much, with certain exceptions about position and stuff, but you can't pass it forward. But you can kick the ball forward or backwards. These make these games very different. One is a carry game, one is a kick game, and you can't because you can't throw it forward, you can't bypass the need to carry, compared to basketball, where you have to be you can go forward with the ball, or you can go backwards, and you can throw forward or backwards, but you have to keep moving and you have to keep bouncing, dribbling the ball to stay legal. All these games are different, and the way they handle the movement of the ball towards the opposing goal, essentially the try line, the goal, the net, tells you how the game's going to happen. It's about the rhythm of the game, and it's the same with D&D and other role-playing games, and it's the same between editions of D&D. And so I want to talk about, I'm going to compare particularly a 5th edition sheet with a translation of that sheet into 2nd edition. This is something I did coincidentally. The character was made in 5th edition, and then we converted it to 2nd edition for a game. And this is a wood elf, a high elf rogue, and we're going to look at how the things that are on the sheet, the things the player generates and the things the player sees in D&D, determine what kind of things happen in this game. So 5th edition, that's what most people are most familiar with. You've got a first level moon elf rogue, high elf rogue. You've got your very basic stuff up here, chaotic, good, etc. AC of 13, plus 2 initiative, that's a derived stat, speed of 30, 9 hit points, which is the 8 from the D8, plus 1 for constitution. You can see the stats here. This actually isn't an amazing 5th edition stat array, no 15s or more, but you can see that you have 3 of the stats have pluses next to them. This, by the way, is generated with, you roll 4d6, you keep the highest 3 for, and then you arrange the stats as you want. So you get plus 2 dexterity, plus 2 intelligence, plus 1 constitution. So he's a tough, moderately sneaky, fairly tough, moderately sneaky, clever rogue. Not very wise, not very strong. You then get your saving throws. You've assigned these, and so the derived stat is derived from a choice you've made here, where you've rolled and then you put it there, and then it's plus or minus to a save, and then you get a couple of those saves doubled. You get some kind of proficiency bonus added to it based on what class you are. So they're very good at dexterity and intelligence saves. And then you've got your skills. These are also derived from these abilities. And you get some free skills and you pick some skills. You can mark by the dots here. So this guy's very good at stealth comparatively, plus 4. He is okay at persuasion, plus 2. Okay at perception, plus 2. I don't know what that E marks out. I haven't made a 5e character in a while, so I need to remember. Plus 2 to intimidation, plus 4 to history, plus 6 to acrobatics. The E is expertise. He's got, despite his bad wisdom, he's ended up having a plus 4 to perception. Expertise is a rogue option. Rogues get better skills. You've got all the basic attacks. Because he's an elf, he gets a free bit of magic, friends. He can make people kind of be influenced by him. Basic equipment, some extra languages, choice of weapons, light armor. There's not, and then here you also have some extra equipment: rations, torches, mess kit, tinderbox, rope, bedroll, water skin, fine clothes, signet ring, scroll of pedigree, and purse. The purse has 25 gold pieces left in it. There's no weight in any of these. There's no calculation for, that essentially you can carry as much as the DM will let you carry usually. There are some procedures around potentially how to do that in the book. Over here, Fey Ancestry, you get extra advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. You get your free spell. You get a background feature in 5th edition. So he's got the noble background, so he has a position of privilege. I think it's that you can always get a hearing and assistance from nobles of the same culture. It's a kind of role-playing advantage generally, though some of them have mechanical implications. So sailor, you can always get a berth on a ship, wanderer or whatever it's called. You can always find 6 rations worth per day. Then you get sneak attack. This is a big ability for thieves, obviously, for rogues, sorry. And once per turn, you can deal an extra set of damage to one creature you hit with an advantage. An attack if you had advantage on the attack roll. It must use certain kinds of weapons. Given the weapons, there's not a massive range in damage, and there's only a limited range in effects. Finesse, chiefly, allows you to use dex, and so short swords and rapiers and stuff can. The very heaviest weapons aren't finesse. So a rogue basically can't get his sneak attack off a Lucerne hammer. You don't need advantage if someone else is flanking, and it increases as you level up. Thieves can't, you have language, and trance. Elves only need to meditate 4 hours a day semi-consciously. So this is what's going on with this elf character. What does this tell us about this character? Well, the fact you get maximum hit points at first level says, well, the game wants to ensure you survive for a little while. It's trying to give you a buffer, isn't it? The fact there are pluses to all these things, there's only a small layer in the middle where you don't get pluses or minuses, 10 and 11 I think it is. It says that basically, and 4d6 keep 3 usually gives you decent stat rates, usually better than this. Not always, but it's trying to give you reasonable derived bonuses, and of course those derived bonuses go into your saving throws and your skills. What do the saves throw? Well, you can make choices about what to be good at being tough against. Saves are derived stats from your abilities. You pick your abilities basically, and the saves, your class also buffs some of them, and this is going to make you very good at being protected against some things based on your choices in character creation and your class. It also means that because of the meta of 5th edition, there are some saves that are very weak. Intelligence, which this guy's good against, intelligence saves are quite rare in vanilla 5th edition, so there are dump stats. Charisma can be a dump stat fairly regularly, though there are saves associated with it more than intelligence, so you may want that. Intelligence mostly is going to matter for very few classes where intelligence is the key derived stat you use for your class abilities, so wizards for instance most obviously. But into and to a lesser degree charisma are dumpable stats. Strength, dex, con and whiz are more valuable. It depends of course on how dangerous the game is and what kinds of dangers come into it, but there are some stats that are always useful, there are some stats that are not. What else can we see? You're adding that damage also because it's a finesse weapon to your short sword, dagger and short bow, in fact at +2, because dex counts for all of them. So your minimum 3 damage on all of those types of weapons. You get +4 to the rolls. Remember, in the D20 system, 3rd, 4th and 5th edition, you roll a D20, you add a modifier, an attack bonus. Here it's derived from a level-based proficiency and an ability-based bonus. And that final result is what AC you hit, what armor class you hit. So +4 is fairly meager for first level without being absolutely disastrous, but fairly meager because these aren't amazing stats. And that would suggest anyway that you're going to on average hit AC 14 or 15, because you're on average you're going to hit 10, you're going to roll a 10 or 11. So AC 14 or 15, you're going to more often than not hit, well, on average, that is to say, you're going to hit most mid-range targets. You're going to hit basically every normal human target that isn't plate armored with or chainmail with shield. I think you might even hit a guard on 15. And you're going to hit a lot of monsters. You're going to hit virtually all humanoids, virtually all the time. You're going to hit quite a lot of undead, because skeletons and zombies, and indeed quite a few others, only have quite low ACs, but some only have ACs of 14 or 15. You have a reasonable chance, fairly regularly at +4, a quarter of the time, you're going to hit AC 19, let's say. So you're going to hit stuff that's very, very tough a quarter of the time. You also see, by the way, the death save system here, which is worth saying that this, I think, technically introduced in 4th, but this is a system where if you go to 0 or less, you roll, and there's a dramatic element here because you might be able to get up, or you might fail twice at a time, but you basically see whether you get to 3 fails or 3 saves first. You're more likely than not to get a success or a critical success because you need to get 10 or more. So you've got 55% chance of getting a success or a critical success. 20 gets you up. Failure, 3 failures mean you die. A natural 1, so a critical failure, 5% chance, means you take 2 failures. So there is a dramatic element there. There is a thing where there are a few things that can affect that. And the point is that if you recover, you just get up. If you're stabilised, you have to wait till the end of the encounter. If you're on a 20, you just get up and you're on 1 again. So there's, I think in 4th, did you not spend a healing surge potentially by default as well? Yeah, so it's a dramatic system to make it that you don't know what's going to happen when you die. You're not bleeding out because there is a randomised chance of whether or not you stabilise or bleed. And you don't instantly die when you hit 0, and you can just get back up. And the consequences by default are not very serious. There is a lingering injury table that's optional in the DMG, which is fairly mild. Looking over here, free spell. It's a cantrip, so it's at will. You can use it every round. Very, very cheap, very low cost way of befriending people out there in the wide world. Position of privilege background feature. Sneak attack here. You can hit someone. Basically, there are multiple ways you can hit someone. If you have advantage on the attack roll, so as long as it's finesse or range, so it can be close combat, it can be ranged. You can get lots of ways. There's lots of things where you could try to make a decision that will give you an advantage to hit someone. You know, they could be in close combat. They could be prone. Ranged. You might be hidden. There could be things where you gain advantage on your attack roll via other things, via help actions or via spell effects. You know, or say a barbarian making a reckless attack. You don't need advantage if someone is flanked, basically. If an ally is adjacent. There's no default absolute flanking rules. Positioned on the board opposite, you get +2 to hit. But this is a version of that where it just bypasses the need for the rogue to have advantage. So if you can get someone next to them, you always have advantage. So there's a teamwork thing. There's also 2 things, Fey Ancestry and Trance, which are, along with having the cantrip, are advantages of being an elf specifically. You have advantage, which is, I think, +4, roughly, +3, is it, on average? Equivalent on saving throws against being charmed. Magic can't put you to sleep, so you're immune to the spell sleep. You also charms. There's a limited set of common offensive charms. Other charm equivalents, charm person and friends and stuff, are not often used by most DMs against most PCs, though they can be. In 5e, it's not really designed like that. You don't see many examples of that in adventures, is what I mean, as well. But yes, it means there are some spells with the charm keyword which will not be as effective against the elf. And trance, they don't need to sleep. So sleep would theoretically be something which would, because you have to sleep for 8 hours a night, so you all have to go around camping and stuff in the wilderness. The elf allows you to bypass that wholly, because they only need to sleep 4 hours a night, and by sleep not do other stuff. They could go and hunt and stuff the rest of the time, and they are conscious or semi-conscious. They're not fully asleep, and you get the same benefit. It says, yeah, remaining semi-conscious. So this seems to be open to the interpretation that this is a way of bypassing the need for the party to have a watch rota. Having an elf is really useful because of that. It seems to me we're being told. Let's go to the equivalent over here, Moraine the Gold, in the 2nd edition. This is not as attractive and fun as a 5th edition sheet. There are some okay fillable 2nd edition or equivalent sheets, but this is what I do. You can see I put the stats over. Dex is one higher for some reason. I don't remember why that was. I don't know if it may be to do with the, I think it's to do with the racial bonus, isn't it? So he's again a moon elf, high elf, of particularly of a moon elf version, if that's relevant from Forgotten Realms Adventures, I don't know. Combat information. So we've got all the same stats, actually. We'll look at those first. So strength, he's still got a penalty on the hit probability. In fact, it's technically less bad than in 5th, because it's only -1 rather than -2. We'll talk about that, though. There's then stuff about damage adjustment none, so damage and to hit are separate rather than unified as they are. By the way, the stats here in a normal 2nd edition character are generated, well, in a 1st edition character, the default is the same system as in 5th, 4d6, keep 3 and assign. In 2nd, the default system is actually 3d6, and Zeb Cook does offer some commentary on why this is. I tend to use 4d6k3 outside of Dark Sun for 2nd edition characters anyway, so this would, this could be the same character, basically, from the same generation system. But yeah, to hit and damage are separated. There's a weight allowance, that's the unencumbered carry allowance. Maximum press is how far you can push or pull, basically, how much. Open doors, that is technically a 20% chance on a d20 for pushing open a stuck door. And then there's a bend bars, lift gates, percentage of 0. This is, basically pushing, moving, etc. heavier things than just a stuck door. So classically lifting up a portcullis or bending open iron bars. This it implies a very different game immediately to the 5th edition character, I think. Because what you see is that there is, and not so much the hits and damage, you think, oh, okay, they're divided, that doesn't matter so much. We've already got a thing where you can assign the stats as you like, so that's the same. But suddenly weight allowance and carry allowance, push-pull allowance, matter. You're going to need to know weights in the game. There are going to be downsides if you don't fulfill this, so you're going to be slowed down if you go over your maximum base encumbrance. Maximum press, well, if you want to say, oh, can I put it out of the way, there's a measurement of how far you can put it out of the way. I think there's a table in 5th that might give strength to lift, so I think there is. So there's not alien to that, but it's not on the sheet. Here the player is told this is how much you can do with this. The player has been given the information to make a judgment about how to interact with the world that is not based on dice rolling. Open doors and bend bars, lift gates are similar. Here there's just no chance of them bending bars and lifting gates. Opening doors, well, because that's to do with originally to do with stuck doors, in it where the door has swollen slightly, where it's creaky. The idea that when you're going around in a dungeon environment, there might be things you need to, you might want to enter sneakily, but the actual obstacle is difficult for that. You might need to come up with a solution for that as well. These are measures of a different kind of play by basic implication to the 5th edition sheet. In the 5th edition sheet, you have sleight of hands. You can derive thieves' tools as well. Say Dex plus proficiency will be +4 for that character as well. You can say, oh, can I try to do something clever with this? You could say, oh, athletics. Athletics is the role you use to knock it open. It's worth saying that the basic chances you're going to generally think are going to be better for success in the 5th edition character, usually doing a parallel activity with the more generic skill. I say that because in athletics, Moraine would have a -2, and that would mean that we normally get 8 or 9. That would, you might well expect that normally to be a fail because the take 10. Of course, it means that 45% of the time or 40% of the time, she's going to get the base, take 10 and open it. But here, the open doors chance is 120% chance, and then she can't try to open it again. But it's also that the more generic skill abstracts away the direct physical interactions. Athletics, you'd seem to think, might count for both maximum press, open doors, maybe even for weight allowance, though you might see that as more to do with just base strength. But certainly bend bars, lift gates too. They're also with strength or athletics. But here there are particular discrete activities you're pointed towards and ways of measuring it that you're pointed towards, which indicate very specific kinds of physical interactions. where you need to identify them and do them. And I think that's interesting that these early editions assume specificity over a generic nature, and that's intentional, it's not accidental. From 3rd edition onwards, there's an intent to go generic because it's assumed to be easier to run. Dexterity, this reaction is your initiative and your surprise modifier. Surprise is a roll that just happens in lots of situations, particularly random encounters, but also in preset encounters. Using a D10 in 2nd edition, a D6 in 1st edition, and on low numbers, you roll, your side rolls, on a low number you're surprised, and the reaction modifier therefore can really swing that away. It's something which is then a very powerful effect, but it is conditional on the dice roll. Missile attack adjustment, what you'd think, it doesn't give damage bonuses to anything. Strength gives damage bonuses to javelins, things like that. Bows and to special composite bows. Most bows and all crossbows do not get any damage bonus via strength or dex. They have different advantages. Defensive adjustment is your AC, so that's the same, that your AC is modified in both by your dex. But you see here it's lower. Even at 15, at 14, Moraine's 5th edition stat, she would have an AC modifier of 0, so her leather AC would be 8. Here, the defensive adjustment at 15 is -1. It would be still +2. 14 and 15 are the same, and 5th for that, so it'd be +2. But in here, in the 2nd edition sheet, at 14 it'd be 0 in 2nd edition. 15 it goes to 1. You'll notice it's -1. That's not necessarily terribly important, the plus-minus, for our purposes of comparing the game that is created, but it does relate to THAC0 and AC. Constitution, HP adjustment, none. That'd be +1 in 5th. So there's already a lower cap on health via the fact you need to roll higher to get bonuses. The same with dexterity and the same with strength actually as well. With all these things, you have to roll very high to get significant bonuses. But there are different things that always apply. System shock and res survival. System shock applies to things like magical aging effects and resurrection survival. Every time you're raised or rezzed or whatever, you have to roll resurrection survival to see if you actually survive. And then if you do, you are raised, but you lose 1 constitution, which of course damages your constitution chances in the future. Again, this implies a different game where there are more threats and where more things can go wrong for the character. System shock is actually the better example of that, because there are a bunch of system shock things like putting on magical armor sometimes, for instance, as well. There are a bunch of things which require you to roll system shock, and if you fail, you die. Or there's an alternative effect listed under the particular, it might well roll system shock, if failed, this happens. I'm trying to think, there was some monster I was using recently that had a partial system shock effect. There are more things that are dangerous to you, and they're not things that can be vastly swung even by assigning your con. If you have 17 con, that's much better than 12. Absolutely, you're into the 90s. But the range of success and fail is narrower, and there are fewer ways you can manipulate it. Bonus number of languages. I tend to use that as number of bonus non-weapon proficiencies because I do use NWPs in 2nd edition. Int. Other than that, for a non-wizard, other than non-weapon proficiencies, intelligence doesn't matter for non-wizards. However, non-weapon proficiencies do. So, yeah, we'll have a look at that in a moment. Wisdom low, magical defense adjustment. Oh, so this is like a save modifier. So that's the one parallel. Wisdom is the only thing that negatively affects save modifiers. Constitution, you can get poison save bonus, racially or via super high con. You need 19 or more, I think. Dwarves and halflings get it anyway. So there are some ways via very low or high wisdom and via very high constitution or racial bonuses that saves can be modified. Otherwise, none of these are affecting saves. Again, the player is not tooling their character sheet as much, not relying on those out-of-game choices as much. Charisma, max henchmen, how many people can you actually get to follow you, and what's their loyalty base, and what is the reaction adjustment when monsters meet you, basically. So here we have a system which isn't present in 5th edition, which is that there is, when most monsters, by monsters I mean any NPC really, meets you, they, not all, some may have a preset reaction, but most are going to check to see what they think about you. And they're going to have that modified by whoever is leading the party. And so charisma becomes, in the same way that if you want to have any followers, you want to have higher charisma, and they become more loyal, the higher your charisma. Equally, you'll get on better with wavering, slightly aggressive or slightly scared or potentially friendly NPCs and monsters. Everywhere in the middle are going to be adjusted every time by the charisma of, well, some characters. And of course, that depends who you send ahead. It's going to affect a lot of strategic things. Charisma matters more. Both charisma and int, because of how int affects skill access, basically, matter more by default here, depending on the kind of game that's being played at least. Then we get to combat. Thaco. Sword and bow is 19 because of being an elf. Melee and missile otherwise are 20. There's non-proficiency penalty. There is this is the inverse. The non-proficiency penalty is easy to put as the inverse of the proficiency bonus of 5th. Rather than getting +2, a thief would get -3. There's damage and a weapon speed. The damage is versus small and medium and versus large. Short swords are better versus large creatures. Short bows are the same. They both have a weapon speed, which is an initiative modifier. The lower the better. And then rate of fire. So though short bows and other missile weapons don't have damage bonuses, apart from usually slings do, and it's a reason why slings having a lower ROF is okay, because they get more guaranteed damage. But missile weapons aren't there to be manipulated into high damage items. They instead get a higher rate of fire usually. So you get more attacks, and you're doing it at a safer distance. So that's better. There are upsides and downsides, of course, to each. The fact that there are weapons that affect small, medium versus large creatures differently makes weapon choice much more important in 5th by default compared to vanilla 5th. This is even more exaggerated in 1st edition, where there is by default a detailed system of something called to hit versus AC, where different weapons are good versus different AC categories. There's a reduced version of that in 2nd, which basically usually makes it harder to hit, and it's actually one of the few times I would say, as a defender of lots of specific innovations in 2nd and simplifications, is one that doesn't really capture the feel of the 1st edition system. But by default, you're still going to worry about what weapons are good against what size, and they're still, although they're not listed here, they're still slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning, and more of those matter more of the time than in 5th. You're more likely to have straight immunities and significant vulnerabilities rather than partial resistances, partial vulnerabilities. That's a monster design thing, but weapons point us towards that. Attacks per round, 1 every 1. Classes go up in the number of attacks they can have over different numbers of levels. Fighters go up quickest, and fighters also have the option of specialising in weapons early, which means they will get more attacks straight away from level 1 and more bonuses. So there is a multi-attack thing. It's more specific, but more generic in one way. Every class can have it, but it's how quick you get accesses by class. It's more specific in some ways and more generic in others. Thaco, without going into the Thaco versus descending versus ascending AC thing, the point is that you want to know what D20 roll you need to hit equivalent AC 20 in 5th edition terms. The highest normal AC that doesn't have extra things going on with it. And here you can see to hit AC 20, normally Moraine is going to need 20, no bonuses whatsoever. But for sword and bow, she needs 19, equivalent +1 bonus. Now, if it's a weapon she's not proficient with, she's going to need 23 technically, but a 20 always hits, so it's actually the same. If it's a sword or bow she's not proficient with, in other terms, she's going to need 22. So there is much more limited bonuses and penalties. And remember, as I said, missile attack and hit probability for close combat are significantly reduced. In fact, I think that's one thing here I've obviously gotten wrong, because that sword bow should be 20 and melee and missile should be 21 because of the melee should be 21 because of the to hit probability. So she's best with a bow. Bow 19, swords 20, melee 21, other missile 20. So it's a lot harder to hit stuff in terms of average AC hit. If you're at a +1 equivalent to your die roll, you're usually going to hit AC 11 or 12, which is AC 9 or 8 in AD&D, and so that means you are hitting, you know, zombies and stuff, and you are hitting other relatively easy creatures, but you need more attacks or you need more bonuses to reliably hit anything. It's hard to hit. Suddenly, this stuff about rate of fire seems more attractive, doesn't it? You know, throwing 3 darts in a round, as your wizard throwing 3 darts suddenly becomes incredibly clutch. The other advantages or disadvantages a wizard has around spell access are mitigated by the fact that you can make different choices that make the character useful. You don't have to make it all happen via having more magic access. AC 7, that's equivalent to 13. Hit points 2, that means on a d6 moraine roll 2, rather than base 9 hit points, maximum of 8 from a d8, +1 for con. There's no con bonus here, and you're rolling. By default, you're rolling at least. Some supplements in basic and in AD&D will say, oh, go for max to start with. But hit points 2, you're a lot more vulnerable. If you're playing absolute default, you die at 0, but a common use, you know, it's an option. It's a common optional rule in first edition, and it is a blue box optional rule in second. Is Death's Door some version of you hit -2 or -3, but you can get to -2 or -3 without dying. You can get to -10. You have to get to -10 without dying. Is the second edition rule. So you're bleeding out, and you lose hit points every round. So there's still a simulation there. Death save's not a simulation; they're an abstraction. By that I mean the thing that happens, you know, is part of a game. It's purely ludic. Whereas the -1 hit point is much more measured. Like, will point you much more quickly to, oh, he's bleeding out. That's not to say one is better than the other, but rather they have different impacts. So you've got a buffer of, say, 4 or 5 hit points before you die. Straight it off one hit using first edition Death's Door, which I do. And then a bigger buffer if you fall unconscious and then bleed. So it's tougher again, you're in more danger. It's on Iron Man mode. Saves, death, wands, paralysis, breath, spells. None of these are modified apart from possibly spells. I don't know if I've default modified that. Technically, not all spell saves would be magical, but virtually all are. So basically, wisdom nearly always applies to all spells, and a lot of wands as well, and a lot of other effects. Anything that is a magical ability rather than an innate ability will be affected by wisdom. There are 5 saves. None of them rely on your stats beyond the limited degree to which a conditional situation is modified by poison or magical defense adjustment. But they are affected by your class. Which class you have tells you what saves you start at first level and how quickly your saves improve. So here again, the idea that the player is tooling their character beforehand is greatly reduced. Mostly it's default. It's again pointing you to a game where most of the action is happening in the game rather than out of the game. Languages, proficiencies, non-weapon proficiencies, optional second edition system taken over from some of the 1.5 books in first. He only has shooting has 3. Could have a 4th actually, could have 5 presumably. Yeah, 6, 2 plus 4 for bonuses. And if I was making a character now, I wouldn't leave those 3 languages. I'd put them here. This was an early adaptation. Very good at looting. That's a skill from Complete Thieves. Tumbling and alertness. The higher the score, the better, because you're rolling equal or under. The skills are much more specific. Tumbling is acrobatics, but you don't use it for anything where you're like, can I do this? Can I parkour? It has much more specific conditions and specific strengths as well. It can give you an AC bonus. Looting is very specific to do with how quickly you can identify things that are valuable and get them out. And alertness is a sort of perception skill. It's quite heavily, it's straight wisdom, I think, or something like that. And it's that looks like Wiz +1 maybe, whatever. It's something which is more limited again than perception. You can't simply say, can I roll perception till I find something. All these are skills, but they rely on a much more specific set of conditions to trigger, much like the implication of open doors, bend bars, lift gates maximum press, or again a system shock in a different context. They're much more specific, much more limited. You can technically ask someone for an ability roll from any of these. Roll 11 or less to pass a basic charisma roll, for instance. So that'd be the equivalent of ability rolls in 5th edition, but it's not really often used in adventure design, and it's not something which has an obviously massive mechanical niche in 2nd. So, Sleep Charm Resist, this is obviously parallel to that ability in the other one. 90% resistance, you've got a 90% chance of resisting any charm or sleep. That is better probably than being completely resistant to sleep, but with an advantage to charm. You have very high magic resistance to those things, and you get weapon proficiency to hit with certain swords and bows. Elven Surprise, you and halflings, if you're on your own or just with halflings not in metal armor, and you have a very good chance of surprising your opponent. You're so sneaky, so good at being in the wilderness. Also very good at finding concealed doors. This isn't carried over at all. This again points towards a meta of a game where concealed and secret doors are common, and having someone who can either by default, the DM checking, or by intentionally searching, find secret and concealed doors. Again, it points to, and this, I think the game explanation is, oh, well, it's because you're going to be, they're from the forest and they know all about secret doors or whatever. So yeah, an idea again that points heavily towards a dungeon style of play where there are things the players have to investigate and search for and find. And players can find concealed doors, particularly anyway. Secret doors you'd need to usually have a mechanism on that the player would have to work out. Concealed doors they might just be able to identify. But yeah, there's something where either the players have to find it by interaction, or you have a specialist who has a chance of finding it. Not anyone can roll this, only an elf. It's an interesting thing where, even where there are roll dice to break the game kind of abilities, they're much more siloed into what a particular character is good at. You can't have anyone be good at it. You can't just pick whatever skills you want that break the game. Non-weapon proficiencies don't do that. Instead, it has to be that the things that do break the game, as it were, are heavily class kit or ancestry based. And invisibility inwards, virtually invisible if moving carefully inwards and not attacking. Combine that with a Cloak of Elvenkind and you have an incredibly, and the Elven Surprise thing, you have an incredibly powerful wood sneaker. Thief functions, so rather than having sleight of hand and stealth, rather than having skills, D20 type skills, you have D100 skills, which are percentage chances of success at a variety of things. In first, you don't pick what these are. You just get basic. You get by level versions. In second, you get some customizability to make you good at one thing rather than the other. And you can pick which you like of those if you're an AD&D player. But yeah, they are. It basically means you are going to be steadily getting better at a bunch of things, but you start quite weak. You start, at 15, 20, 30% at stuff, apart from Climb Walls, which starts at 60. I think you're 5% at Open Locks or something mad like that. Or maybe Find Remove Traps, I think it might be, I don't know. And yeah, you can in second edition, you can improve them out of the game, as it were, out of the action of the game in the downtime. But you have low chances of success at a lot of them. And you can't just break the game and hope that that's going to happen via having them. You have a chance of doing it. Of course, the DM might give you more percentage increase or decrease depending on the circumstances of the situation and depending on your play. So there is a conditional bonus thing, as you'd expect. It's interesting to look at what the things are. Picking pockets, sleight of hand, I guess. Move silently, stealth pretty much. Hide in shadows also stealth. They're separate. It's assumed in some way there are different activities. These two also are rolled by the DM typically. You don't know the result. You don't know if you've succeeded at stealth or at whatever it is like that. Detect noise is perception. It's a different perception to alertness, if you like. It's one that you have to actively choose to do, and it's more about listening at doors, hearing noises down the corridor, things like that. So there's something where you're specially good at that. Again, this class is very good at stuff that most people have very limited access to. Find Remove Traps. Well, this is important that this is not all traps. This is treasure traps originally. Room traps are things like rolling boulders or pits, and anyone can find them. Treasure traps are small locational things, you know, in locks, for instance, poison needles in locks. That's a classic one. And here, rather than it being something where you investigate the room and find it, or in some versions have a base chance of finding a room trap, you have to have the right person who knows what they're doing with these small, delicate traps. You know, oh, there's actually a tiny wand in there that will go off if we open it. And then they can also try to remove it. But it's not certain. It's a 30% chance each time. It's as if you had no bonuses, it's as if it was DC 14 every time. You know, a bonusless DC 14 check every time, or something like that. Is that right? Someone correct me in the comments. Inventory, you can see there are issues of encumbrance. This affects your movement, including your overland movement. Everything is weighted. He has a mule for this very purpose, because otherwise, and the mule can carry more. I think the problem here is he's very weak and is wearing leather armor, which weighs 15 pounds, and is carrying rope, which weighs 8, which is pretty much his over his weight allowance already. So yeah, there's an interesting thing there where logistics matters, and that is something you're prepping out of the game in one sense, but you're not doing it before you play or when there's no play. It's a decision you're making as you play. You need to, you know, to get stuff. Remember, the default in first and an optional in second edition AD&D is that the gold you remove from a dungeon, which measures difficulty, I'll talk about that another time, is your XP, or your main source of XP. In which case, you need carry capacity. In which case, logistics becomes an important part of the game. So you can see in all this, there's a game which indicates that you are much weaker, that you're much more fragile, you're much less able to instantly do things at first level, your chances of success are lower, your preparation needs to be higher, you need to interact more with more things, you need to have the right pick of weapons, rate of fire is very valuable at low levels. If we add in magic, the fact that you don't have cantrips unless you're using some version of a 0 level magic system. I do actually, but it's a 1 use a day of either cantrip or horizon, if you know those spells in second. You don't have damage cantrips. Basically, you don't have all these options you can do every turn magically. As a wizard, you get 1 spell. As a priest or druid, you're going to get 2, 3, or 4 spells at first level, usually. In all these things, you've got a situation where it's really possible to run out of things that mechanically break the game, but you have to then think your way around it, or retreat. Because you're weaker, you have to retreat in combat more generally anyway. You see that in comments from, I'm thinking, Gary Gygax and Rob Kuntz comments in products they were publishing in the noughties for 3rd edition, derived 3rd edition Castles and Crusades or AD&D. You know, the idea that this is a game much less about rolling dice until you win and much more about picking your moment. One is kind of this high action, high octane, heroic game, and one is a game where you are in a very hostile world and you triumph over it via your wits and via tactics and good use of the resources you do have. If someone is really tough and strong, yes, they go at the front. They're different games. They are similar, they are cousins, but they're not the same game, are they? They share all these terms, but they are not the same game, and one does one thing better and one does another thing better. So the game that the rules of D&D create depends on the addition of D&D, and what those rules are really does matter. It's not a kind of a dial where you tip one way or the other. They give very different results, very different experiences at the table. And perhaps one problem when we're comparing these is that we are confused by the fact that we share so many of the same names, whilst being very, very dissimilar play experiences. Anyway, that's what I think. You tell me what you think in the comments, and I will see you next time.